Mobilize Denver. I'd like to welcome everybody, and we really appreciate you coming out tonight to learn about the candidates and the election coming up in April. Our group started discussing, complaining about the condition of Denver over our weekly Saturday morning breakfast meetups, and then quickly moved to the backyard of our co-founder, Lance Lindsay. He's sitting way in the back. To accommodate more friends and family members for barbecue and politics. Don't know whether you've picked up on the food theme yet. Breakfast, we get together and eat. We decided to do something, and a year or plus minus, we're here tonight organizing this forum, and we believe that the mayoral job is really important to Denver. And so we really need to take our time in deciding on a, oh, sorry. No, I'm not used to. It's really important to see as many people as we can, to watch them and listen to what they have to say, because we're really facing some really tough issues coming up now through the pandemic and into next year. Our goals for Mobilize Denver are to inform, educate, and empower the citizens of Denver so they can make a fact-based decision about who should lead Denver into the future. We are really pleased tonight to have Lamone Knowles as our moderator. She is a longtime community activist and influencer. She is president of the East Denver Residents Council, a registered neighborhood organization, vice president of the Northeast Park Hill Coalition, and past president of Colorado Acorn Park Hill chapter. As an alumni of Emerge Colorado and Organization for Action, she credits those organizations for raising up her political awareness and leadership in the community. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Ms. Lamone Knowles.
So good afternoon, evening, morning, whatever it is. I don't even know what time it is. How are you guys doing? Are you glad to be here? You want to meet the candidates? Yes. All right, so let's do a little housekeeping right quick. Each candidate will briefly introduce themselves for 3 to 5 minutes, and then the forum where we will begin. The beauty of this forum is that you all will get to ask the questions, not me running the table, okay? The candidates will have 1 minute to answer questions, so there should be a lot of question and answering today. Now, the questions you ask, don't be asking 3-part questions, because they're only going to remember the last one in that stack. All right, so just ask one simple question, burning desire. There won't be any follow-on questions because we want everyone in the room to have a chance to inquire, alrighty? This is a forum, not a debate, okay? So if it turns into a debate, then the microphones are gonna get turned off, all right? Because the debates will come later on down the road. Hopefully our people here tonight will be in the race all the way to April. And I'm happy that these candidates are from the community because they understand what we need, what we want, and it takes a lot of courage to stand up and run for office. I know, because I ran for city council. So without further ado, I want to introduce the candidates to you, starting with Thomas Wolf, Ian Tafoya, just walk on in, you guys. Aurelio Martinez, Lisa Calderon, and Anna Burrell. Go ahead and have a seat. Now y'all can do better than that with the clap. That's right. Y'all look like you ready.
Ready.
How you doing? How you doing, Ian?
I feel great.
How you doing, Aurelio? How about you, Lisa?
I'm in my element.
All right, how about you, Anna?
Fantastic to be here.
All right, so I'm gonna give each of you 3 to 5 minutes to introduce who you are, the neighborhoods that you're from, and what your top 3 issues are, okay? Starting with Mr. Wolf.
Oh, look at that. I thought being a W, it's usually reverse order, but nice to get to go first. The first thing you need to know that I live in Congress Park or Cherry Creek, North Cherry Creek anyway. I had formerly lived, I guess it's a forced home, we've lived in Denver. On a grad school, I lived over in Sloan's Lake, effectively. Then was overseas and came back, lived in Hilltop, lived in Carl, lived in Cherry Creek, and now where we are. Was there something else I was supposed to answer?
Your campaign issues.
My campaign issues.
Yeah, why you're running.
Excellent. I'll jump right into it. I wrote this out so that I don't get jumbled in my thoughts. I'd like to start by saying, is there something else you need? No? Sorry. I'd like to start by saying what an incredible city we live in. It's just such an amazing oasis within a very complicated nation and world, and we are very fortunate to live here. I know that with effective leadership, Denver's potential is limitless. Given your attendance, I know you share these beliefs as well, so I thank you, and along with a big thank you to our hosts. Now for the harsh reality. We're in the midst of a growing humanitarian crisis due to perhaps 5,000 fellow Denverites who are in desperate need of shelter. These people are as needy as they come. Their troubles frequently include chemical dependency, mental illness, and criminal past and presence. And the most challenging have all 3. Individually, it's not possible to provide full solutions for this population, but it is our city's job to systematically confront this problem and administer solutions. The solutions need to be a triage of clinicians, social workers, and police officers. The most inhumane thing we can do is to continue to allow these encampments and not provide shelter. Our city has excess buildings and property used for this effort, and all districts need to contribute to the solution. If these resources are not enough, we need to engage with state and federal agencies until the crisis is under control. Aside from the impact to lives, this crisis is also impairing the progress and values of our city. Once we have turned this tide and are back on course, there are a number of additional benefits to be gained in the same way. Confronting and solving hard problems, paired with better allocations of resources and better utilization of existing assets. I hope this forum allows for your input. I value hearing what skills and experiences and vision you would like in your next mayor. I hope we have time to get into the greater detail and of strategy and execution. Together, I believe we can elevate Denver. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Lamone, I think you forgot you were also with City Park Friends and Neighbors, weren't you? You didn't give that shout out. You've been doing the work for a very long time.
Thank you.
My name is Ian Thomas Tafoya, and it is really a pleasure to be here. I continue to see more and more people coming in the back that we've done work with over the years. And I hope that you leave this discussion today seeing which candidates have been doing the work in the streets to help solve some of Denver's most critical issues. I was born in the West Side, and I grew up in Barnum until I was 14 years old. I moved to the Cold neighborhood with my mother, where she still resides, when I was 14. Had my first apartment when I was 18 years old in Capitol Hill, just 2 blocks from Cheeseman Park. And believe it or not, I looked this up, I paid $395 a month in rent for a 1-bedroom apartment. Wow. It wasn't that long ago. I lived in City Park West for nearly 7 years, where I was the president of the neighborhood association, served on the Capitol Hill United Neighborhood Association, and have gone on to be a leader in zoning and planning for the Denver Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation for the last 5 years. Currently, I reside in Bear Valley. Unfortunately, and I want to just acknowledge my grandmother who couldn't be here. She passed away just last month but my grandmother, I was her caregiver for 6 years, okay? So I lived in Bear Valley, and I really started to understand how the housing crisis and the healthcare crisis are intersecting with our aging population here in Denver, Colorado. My top issues, for your perspective, are environment. My day job, I am the Colorado State Director for Green Latinos, a national environmental justice organization where I've taken on the worst polluters in Colorado, successfully winning so many victories for our people, including a most recent victory of upgrading protections on the Platte River, a first in the state of history of a people-driven rulemaking, bringing that forward. You may have also voted yes on 306. 7 out of 10 people in this room voted yes for Waste No More Denver. I was the co-author of this. And I have actually co-authored and worked on many ballot issues ranging from environment to the Fair Election Fund. I had a chance to campaign for that one. It was even in a TV commercial. Don't forget that the fair election candidates up here, you can match us 9-1. It's incredibly important that we understand that people power. Now, I agree with Thomas. We're hearing about housing issues. There are huge housing issues in our community. Whether you're a first-time home buyer, you make less than the area median income, which for a family of 4 is $70,000. I think there's a lot of people that are in that position. We have senior housing concerns, and we certainly have been facing huge crisis during the pandemic for the unhoused in our community who do not have access to clean water, trash service, or public sanitation. I'm a proud founder of Headwaters Protectors, who's gathered more than 600 Denverites to weekly bring water to the people, and who has offered big solutions all the way to the mayor's office that have continued to be denied. My last issue is public health and safety, and it interfaces with the issue that I was just discussing with you. It also interfaces with our issues with our criminal justice system, okay? On the first day of the upheaval in the city, I, together with Lisa Calderon and many others, sent a letter to the mayor, and the number one thing I said is, we need to start logging the ammunition. The people who are shooting off the most ammunition are the people who are red flagged for needing change in our system, and we saw the impacts. After 2 days of seeing what happened, we brought together, again, more than 500 Denverites to pick up the pieces, remind people that yes, Black lives do matter, yes, we do need reform, but we also shouldn't be destroying the place we love and call home. Public health interfaces for healthy food for healthy kids, our desperate crisis of infrastructure for people who are being struck walking and biking in our communities, our air quality, which has now been downgraded once again at the federal level. I ask you to join us in our campaign to unite these issues. We have to be thinking intersectionally, and we have to be doing it together. My one hope at the end of this entire process is that the people who have asked themselves, should we be leaders? Should we continue to lead going forward, that we continue to work together? My motto is together we rise, because the best solutions come when we do that together. Again, I'm Ian Thomas Tafoya. I hope I earn your support tonight.
Miss, yes?
Lamont, thank you. Thank you very much for all the hard work you put into putting this forum together. I also like to thank the Mobilize Denver. Now, at my age, I got to take these off so I can read. Okay, so I'm on my topics. What I want to do with this forum is I want to thank everyone for coming here. This place is packed, and I like that because it shows that we have a lot of concerned residents in here, because that's what I'm going to talk about for the majority of my time is residents and neighborhood organizations. One thing I think we can all agree upon is the city is broken. It's broken and it's in dire need of repair. It's been going in the wrong direction for a very long time, and unless we get an administration in place to run this city and change the direction so that we put residents and neighborhood organizations back as priorities in the system, then we're just going to self-destruct, and we're not going to let that happen. Okay. I'm retired. I was an IT man, worked for IBM. I'm retired, and I'm coming out of retirement because we can fix this city. Together we can fix this city. Let's talk about the neighborhoods. Okay. Everyone in here, you've either been involved in your neighborhood or you've been part of a neighborhood organization. And we're always ignored by the city administration. We're just ignored. What our voice, when we voice an opinion or an objection or support, they don't listen. We get a bunch of lip service. I think if you've been in that situation, you know that when a developer or an organization comes into your neighborhood to make a change, whether it's development, building, housing, anything, they come to the neighborhood organization because they have to, not because they want to. They have to because one thing, they want something from the city. They want some type of incentive from the city. So they have to come to the neighborhood to put on their application that they have met with the city, with the neighborhood people, and they have explained and showed their proposal. And that's exactly what they do. They meet with you not to ask you what has to be done to better your neighborhood. They meet you to show their proposal, which they have carefully put together with all the bells and the whistle to convince you that what they're building is best for your neighborhood. In other words, it's not good, and it's been that way for years and years, and that's got to change. The neighborhood organizations and the citizens of the city have to be part of any development, anything that's going on in your neighborhood, anything that's going to affect your neighborhood, because trust me, when it goes to city planning, it passes like butter. When it goes to city council, it passes. We need to stop that, guys. We need to better our neighborhoods. Your neighborhood has to be your safe haven. It has to be. If it's not, why do we live there? It has to be your safe haven. So real quick, with the time I have left, I'm going to talk a little bit about the housing. Okay, the word affordable. I don't particularly like that word affordable because it's used too much by the administration. It's used too much by politicians. It's just overly used. The word affordable I dislike because every house in the city is affordable to somebody. Okay. Now, if you look at the numbers, and it's supposed to be helping the lower income folks and also the medium income, the people that don't make enough money to buy a home. We got to fix that. And I'm trying to go real quick because my time's ending. This is important. This is important because the number you have to make in order to reach the city's affordable is between $60,000 and $90,000. Okay, now taking a line from Sly and the Family Stone, that doesn't include everyday people. Everyday people that work like at Walmart or retail or any of that. If they're on the top of the pay scale and they're making $20 an hour, they're making $38,000 a year. And you tell me how they're going to fit into the city's affordable gap. They're not. Affordable housing is not for them. And we have to understand that, and we have to pay close attention to how these things are happening. I can fix that. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, Lisa, called around.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. I am Lisa Calderon, and I am so thrilled to be here tonight. When Lamone extended the invitation, I immediately said yes. One, because it was Lamone, and you learn not to say no. And she has just been a remarkable presence and organizer. She's also an Emerge alum, as she mentioned, and I am the executive director of Emerge Colorado. So we train women to run for Democratic office. But the other reason that I'm really excited to be here tonight in my first mayoral forum is because it is in Park Hill, a place that has special meaning for my heart. It is where my great-grandmother owned a home in a time when Black women could not necessarily own their own home in redlining and segregation, when my grandmother also owned a home as well. And then I was able to rent a home as a single parent with 2 bedrooms. Which is unheard of today. So the fact that Park Hill has been the site of everything that we love about Denver, about being a place of integration, about being a place that is welcoming, a place where young people could dream again about owning their own home or renting their own place without having 5 roommates just to survive in this city. So I am so glad that we are in a historic place to have this conversation. Some of you may have remembered that I ran for mayor 4 years ago and came in third with almost no money in comparison to the competition as a first-time candidate, and was the first woman of color to make the ballot. And it wasn't easy. And we learned so much, and my values haven't changed from that race. For those of you who don't know me, I have been a community leader for over 30 years, starting as a student at Metropolitan State University, it was college back then. And I want to also thank someone who's here who's very special to me, who helped me to succeed. Professor Richard Jackson is in the audience and was one of my professors. And other folks know him as well. But the reason I bring him up, because he was one of the first people who said to me, Lisa, don't sweat the small stuff, and you are an expert in your own life. Don't worry if there are other people there who are more powerful than you. You have a right to be there and your voice to be heard. So that training as a president of the Black Student Alliance carried me through in lots of different situations. I was born to a 17-year-old Mexican mother and a Black father. And that gives me a unique perspective in terms of bringing our cultures together. My daughter, Savannah, is also Native American identity, and so that population is very near, close to us. I have been an advocate for many years. I've also been a practitioner in terms of being both a service provider, a nonprofit executive. I've worked on issues of homelessness and housing. I have a bachelor's, a master's, a law degree, and a doctorate. And I say all of that because I'm proud of it. It wasn't easy. And it wasn't easy raising a child on your own and going to school and working. My platform is simple, and I can get, when we get into the details in the Q&A, but because I'm also a college professor, it's the acronym of TEACH. So T, transformational transportation. E, economic equity and environmental equity, they go together. A is for affordability, and we'll be talking a lot about that. C is for community safety, and I did a lot on justice transformation. And H is housing and health. So I look forward to having that conversation with you all when we get into the discussion. Thank you so much.
Okay, Anna.
Hi, thank you for being here. It's an absolute honor, and I look out in this crowd, and this is one of the reasons why I'm running. It's supposed to be on.
It sounds
Get
like
closer.
it's not on. It sounds like the mic is on.
The green is on, but it's not working, so let's share.
Moving around.
All right, can you hear me now?
Okay, so the
I
next
got
one is-
you. Tell you what. There's a button on the front too. So you just turned yours on again. There you go.
All right, hello? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having me. It's an honor, and it's especially an honor to look out and see this many people who are actively engaged in our political system. There are some big walls built, which is part of the reason why I'm running. My name is Anna Burrell. I am fairly new here to Denver, and I come from all over the world. By the time I was 18, I'd been to 18 different countries in 32 different states. I was raised in South America quite a bit, and my parents worked in agriculture, so I walked onion fields in many of these places, seeing everything from farmers of half-hectare spaces to onion fields larger than the eye can see. It's a fascinating place to be. I got to see the intersection and the beauty of what happens when cultures come together, what happens when people come together, and the importance of diversity in opinion and thought and vision, and the importance of listening to that from a leadership perspective. So, election cycle before last, the big call to action was to vote. Great, awesome, please absolutely vote. But then when I looked at who I was voting for, I was like, wait a second, There's something fishy here. And so then it started, the call to action that I started shouting from the rooftops was to please run for office. We need people who are citizens in positions of power, involved and actively engaged in our government. And as it turns out, when you point your finger in the other direction, there happen to be a couple of fingers pointing back at you, and so I kept getting kicked under the table. Hey, Anna, you run for office. And I'm like, well, it's terrifying. I prefer not to. Well, sitting in the intersection of business and government, I'm a sustainability consultant. We start first with organizational sustainability because we can't do anything without people and people being on board. And so I sat in stakeholder groups across Denver, and I kept hearing that political will was the reason why things were not getting done. Political will is the reason why our city has been turning its back on its citizens. Political will is the reason why our 78 beautiful and diverse and different neighborhoods have been treated as the same thing. I came to the city and I've fallen in love with the city. And I've fallen in love with the people of the city. And I would love to see leadership that understands the intersectionality of government, that understands how environmental justice is social justice, is economic justice, and we cannot pay attention to one without paying attention to the others, because it's in those moments that we can find the brilliance of the city. And when we listen to community, when we listen to stakeholder groups truly, that is when real and powerful change can be made. And Denver is a gorgeous city of a lot of people, and a lot of the country can look to us for how to do things properly. And I was watching leadership not do this. And so I figured I'd throw my hat into the ring. And thankfully, I'm not alone here. And in looking at leadership and looking at this beautiful panel of people that are up here, there is someone, I have an announcement tonight. There is someone who is far better than I am to be our next mayor, who understands the intersectionality and the importance of having representative leadership, of bringing a diverse array of voices and people to the table, and not just bringing them to the table, but allowing them to have decision-making power at that table. So it is my absolute honor and it is my absolute pleasure to be able to say that I'm stepping out of this race, and my campaign is officially endorsing Dr. Lisa Calderon.
Just for sharing the microphone?
Thank you, Anna. Appreciate your comments. Okay, now here's the fun stuff. Does anyone have any questions they want to start with? So I'll tell you. So you get a minute to respond to the questions, okay? And if it's a stacked bunch of questions, we're going to have to just deal with what you can recall out of that question, okay? So anyone want to start? Okay, Jesse, what?
Oh, there is.
Yes, I'm also a mayoral candidate, if you didn't know. My question is, what are any of y'all on this stage going to do specifically for Black people in the city that are being ethnically cleansed, gentrified out of our communities and our neighborhoods? What are y'all going to do? I would like an answer to that question. Thank you.
Black community, we're here.
I can start.
Go ahead.
So Jesse, it was a pleasure to serve, and we still are, on the Reimagining Policing Task Force together. And part of that is focusing on, it came out of the brutal murder of George Floyd and the protests that subsequently happened. So worked together on over 120 recommendations, and we center the voices of Black folks in particular. So that is one thing. The other is, it's one of the reasons why I ran, is that Black and brown communities were being displaced at an incredibly high rate. Black folks are the second most gentrified population in Denver. And we had a mayor who was not listening to us, and that was part of the reason that I ran. So thank you for the question.
Anyone?
Okay.
Okay, Jesse, just to answer your question is, we have to go back to what I was explaining, the city is broken, okay? You can tell Denver, if you go back 10, 15 years ago, I was I grew up all my life in Curtis Park, 5 Points. Went to Gilpin Elementary School, Cole Junior High, and graduated as a Thunderbolt. Graduated in 1973. Them schools were 90% black. They're all gone now. They're gone. Why? Because they're not being paid attention to economically, and they're not given the same chance for loans, for help, for anything. It's just a lot of lip service. And I only got 30 seconds, and I want to mention also the youth programs. You remember the youth programs back growing up when there was nothing but youth programs. Now the recreation centers don't even have programs, and they blame insurance or this and that. What are the youth supposed to do? They need to grow up. They need to have something to do. And if this city's not providing it, we're lost. And that's going to change.
Oh, no. Okay, this one isn't working. Can everybody hear me? Yes, you can hear me. That's fantastic. I agree with 100% of both of these things that I heard here, but it has to be that and more. I had an opportunity to track along, of course, with the Reimagining Policing Task Force, 121 recommendations. We have more work to do. I can tell you, because I serve the unhoused every single weekend, the traumatic displacement and terrorizing of the poor in our community is disproportionately impacting Black people. That needs to stop. I can also tell you that We Can't Breathe echoes double for the air pollution that's happening in our communities, okay? We have taken on air toxics in the city and county of Denver. We have to continue doing that work, but we also have to empower people, not just youth empowerment, adult empowerment. With organizations and financial literacy, we have to be helping build up our programs to tap into the unprecedented amount of money that's pouring down from the federal government. We deserve to be owners of the businesses. We deserve to lower our energy costs. We deserve to have clean water. It applies to all of us equally, but certainly the impacts are not being felt equally by the communities here in Denver.
Yeah, Jesse, so I would just go back to first principles, which is, the only thing I spoke on, which is encampments, because those are the most needy people in our community. Until that's solved, nothing else can be solved. It's similar to a home. If that was an analogy, if you have no roof, there's no sense in coming up with other programs for anybody else until that is solved. I'm not sure what the complexion of the people in the encampments are from a racial background, but that's the neediest, and that's where all resources need to go before anything else.
Thank you. So typically when I come to spaces like this, I try to talk to or address the candidates that trouble me the most, but I decided to change the narrative tonight and actually lean into the candidate that captivated me the most. So the question is for everyone, but I really want to hear the answer from Ian Tafoya. So your presence, Ian, shows signs of accessibility and a genuine connection to the people. Like when you talked about yourself, you tied it to the work. So if elected, how do you plan to stay accessible to the community? And as best you can, please offer practical steps on how you can do that and try to stay away from conceptual. For everyone, but you captivated me the most, so I really want to hear from you.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, first of all, if you were trying to reach me now during the campaign, please know we're having weekly events. You can find me having coffee all across the city. We're having campaign fundraisers that you're more than welcome to attend. Of course, sliding scale for people who can't afford to be there. But what I'm hearing you say is, how do we make sure our government is accessible? I didn't mention this in the beginning, but I've worked for 3 branches of local government, including the public defender, the mayor, and the Denver City Council. I always received highest marks on community engagement. We always picked up the phone. That was a responsibility. I was part of the group of people that pioneered using outreach tools like MailChimp, Instagram for the first time, but we have to do more. I can tell you the cabinet and the community is one thing that I would love to keep going with, that the mayor is already doing, bringing not just me, but the 60 other individuals that you get to bring forward to the community to be reached is one of the most important things. And I will always have an open door policy where there's somebody actually staffing a desk that you can talk to.
Yeah, anybody that's close enough, they can see that I didn't get cheated on ears. So between that physical trait and plenty of technology that can interact with the citizens and the mayor's office, it's just that to have that will. So these big dishes have been on a listening tour for probably 12 months. And that's always the first thing that comes up where people say that the city doesn't listen. Well, the city, it can choose or choose not to listen. So that's between that person's own will plus, technology that can obviously make that happen. Combination of those two is we can do a lot better.
I thought we were focusing on Ian. What's that?
I went first, yeah.
Oh, okay.
We thought the question was directed to Ian. So she'll have to repeat the question when it comes to me.
Yeah, I'll repeat it.
Okay.
Yeah, I addressed it to Ian. He captivated me. So the question is, if elected, how do you plan to stay accessible to the community? As best you can, please offer practical steps on how you can do this and stay away from conceptual topics.
So I don't know any other way to lead except being connected with the community. My mother, who was an activist in the Migrant Farm Workers Union, taught us around the importance of standing up for those who don't have a voice. And even though we had very little, we lived in the projects, the fact that we needed to use our voices to stand up for other folks was a value that was instilled in me by the age of 5 years old. So my connection to community is where I get my power from, where I get energized from. I can't imagine doing anything differently. And so, it's listening to the people where they are. I want to also decentralize the mayor's office. The fact that we have such a strong mayor system, we need to start moving a lot of those services and agencies right into the community.
You just turned it off. You just turned the light off. Grab some tapes, Christmas. Right there. There you go.
Okay. Okay, my answer to that is really simple. In my introduction, when I addressed this crowd, I talked very heavily on neighborhoods, the community, and citizens, that they were being ignored. So obviously, and you're not listening. You asked the question, so let's listen to the answer.
Are you talking to me?
Well, yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. I heard everything you said.
What? Okay. Anyhow, what my introduction was all about the neighborhood organizations and the citizens of the city, that they're being ignored, and they are being ignored. So that should tell everyone here that my focus is to listen to the people of this city so that we can get done and they can decide what's best for them where they live as a safe haven. That's my whole purpose of running, is to listen to you.
Speaking of mayoral appointments, the mayor has 90 appointees to select. What criteria will you use to select the 90 appointees that will help you fulfill your agenda?
I'll answer that. So the mayor has a cabinet of core people, but then actually the say in many boards and commissions is actually where a lot of policy decisions are made. So that's a lot of power within one person. And I've been one of the community people who have pushed not only the current administration, but the previous administration to always have community input on those appointees. Sometimes we would get it, sometimes we wouldn't. Sometimes we had input on who the sheriff was, sometimes we wouldn't. And in my administration, the community would have a voice in when we get to the top finalists, who do they like? And also to take recommendations of who that should be. When we get into transitional leadership, I want those voices of the community to be able to identify who are the best candidates for that role. So definitely open up the appointee selection process with community input. Thank you.
I agree with 100% that we have to have a process where the final candidates are actually put in front of the people to understand whether or not they can actually feel the pulse and lead the room about the change it needs to create in our city. I can also say that we worked for a lot of years to change the process, so they actually have to be approved by city council. I think that's incredibly important for appointments to be able to jump over that hurdle. Now, when we talk about who we'd like to hire, I hire people all the time for my job. And what I can tell you is, of course, your experience, whether or not you have the right skills for the type of job it is, if you're driven and you're passionate, these things, of course, are all really important. I also think it's important that they live in Denver. It's very frustrating when we see leadership that doesn't actually live in Denver and has to deal with the situation of their outcomes. I also want to close, I think I have 30 seconds here. We need to be looking as we transition, and I've already begun this process because, as I told you, I was a city employee. Who are the next in line who've been doing the work? Brilliant ideas. These people need to be lifted and promoted before we lose them to the private industry.
Clear and simple. We have to get the best people that we appoint to this administration. And the best people are not always the ones that have a very perfect resume on paper. We experience in the community, experience in this city means a lot to the qualifications to appoint an administration, a cabinet that's going to be able to do the best for this city and do the best for the people that live in this city. So we will take very, very careful look at all the applicants to make sure they fit the picture both on paper and experience and what they've done in the city. And I do agree with Leon, they should live in Denver. Thank you.
Yeah, that residency requirement's an obvious one, and completely agree with that as well. There's a number of groups or consortiums that are trying to attract people into public service. One of them is the Governor's Fellowship. My wife was actually in the inaugural class of that, and that's continued for a number of years. And I think that the idea of that is it just draws people that want to serve, and it shows them a pathway to do that. So I think that's a good place to start. I would look at it the other way. I'd like to see people from business that have had a track record and then are drawn to, curing parks and recs, fixing up parks and recs, or doing something with, the government, the city's real estate here in Denver. I was out at the round table here that John Bailey hosts a couple weekends ago, and it seems like that attracts some leaders with a lot of good, fresh ideas and has kind of a younger bent to it.
Okay, thank you.
Over here, brother had his hand up, or longest over here.
Where?
Right here.
Where is our rover? Yeah. I know you don't want me to be it. Hi.
Okay. To me, the neighborhoods, the city has lost its integrity due to development. How are you guys going to slow down development to where it's getting out of control in the neighborhoods and within the city?
Okay, I guess I'll start on this because that's a very good and touchy issue with my whole running for this thing is everyone knows that this city is very pro-development. And what I'm saying is I'm not anti-development. I welcome development with open arms, but there's a place for every development going. When that development infringes with neighborhoods and communities, then it shouldn't be allowed. When they have to go to the city administration to try to get PUDs passed and incentives done so that they can build whatever they're going to build, and you have neighborhoods that object to the development, then we need to listen to them neighborhoods. We shouldn't be giving incentives to any developers and developments if that development is going to infringe upon neighborhoods and become an uncomfort to the neighborhoods. And they're not doing that. I can count them on my hands and feet that they infringe on neighborhoods, and it's just no good, and that's not gonna happen. There's plenty of room in Denver for people to put the developments that they want, and that's how it's gonna be.
Okay, for those who want to ask questions, should we do a number system, or you just want to jump up like the weasel? I want to play.
I want to answer that question first on development. And I do it from a higher level, which is, if you break it down, what's real estate? You're a neighbor. So, somebody owns a property or somebody owns a property there. Are you a good neighbor or are you a bad neighbor? I mean, that's pretty much what it is, right? So there's rules as to what you can build within that neighbor adjoining property, and then the city needs to obviously enforce those. I don't think you can be anti-development in this city, or I'm not sure where we're going to put the people. If you want to discourage risk capital into the city, that is not the direction I would espouse. If you look at any markets that are like that, it has been very tragic for them in every tier of real estate.
Sure. So as a fourth generation Denverite, I remember the city before we had this massive development. And what I hear implicit in your question is that the displacement of our cultural communities, the integrity of our neighborhoods, the connection with our neighbors, the shrinking Black and brown communities who are being pushed out. To me, that is part of inherently the question. We want development that works for those populations as well. The fact that we are building a city for the wealthiest, and we want to import the workers rather than building sustainable, affordable housing for them. So the question is, what kind of development do we need? We need affordable development. And there's a lot of tension between the NIMBYs, not in my backyard, and the YIMBYs, yes to everything. We need actually a get it right in my backyard plan.
Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna just run through a couple of the solutions I hear here. First of all, we need to be approaching our housing crisis and development on a regional level. We have a regional council of governments, a Metro Mayor's caucus. We need leadership out of Denver to help solve this problem. We're also dealing with the unhoused problem of an entire metropolitan area without getting the resources. So if we can't bring a leader forward who can gather 47 other governments to work together, we're not going to solve this problem. We also need to be talking about the impacts of development, from transportation to safety crossing streets to more park space. They're all completely intertwined. I want to remind you that I am the chair of the Zoning and Planning Committee for INC. I believe zoning is a critically important part to this. And I'd like to let you know from an education perspective, there's actually an equity and rezoning process that's going on right now that you can participate in. They are not yet done with the recommendations, and I would highly encourage you to do it. I also think the resources are given to the largest developers to help them develop their plans. We need to offer those same kind of resources out of community and planning development to nonprofit developers. I want to close by saying the amount of housing for renters at low incomes needs to continue to grow. Nola Miguel is here in the back. We co-authored an op-ed and we sat on a task force saying, yes, we need to do more for people who make less than $70,000 a year.
In the back. Real quick, I have 3 yes or no questions for you all, and I'll start with Mr. Wolf and we'll go down. About education. Do you believe in a mayoral controlled school board? The second question is, do you support school closures? And the third question is, do you believe in the current direction of the board? Those are all yes or no's. And I'll say them one more time. Number 1 is, do you believe in a mayoral controlled school board? The second one is, do you support school closures? The third one is, do you believe in the current direction of the Denver School Board? We'll start with Mr. Wolf and go down.
No, yes, no.
Can I ask a follow-up question to you, Director Anderson? Are you talking about the current closures, or are you talking about ever a closure?
Just entirely, the issue of school closure.
I would say yes, no, no. Oh, wait, the first one is a Mayoral, right?
Yeah.
I'm not even sure I completely understand what that means, so I'm gonna say no to that because I don't think I quite understand what it would mean for the city mayor to take over all of the school board.
No on the mayoral control, no school closings on the second one. And no, I don't think they're doing a very good job.
You remembered all that?
So no to mayoral control. We've come from an era of that actually before, when we had the mayor's appointee running the school board and the Parks and Rec department. There needs to be that separation. The school closures, nobody wants to see school closures. Nobody. The question is, how do you maintain a budget when you have an entire school with only one classroom being used? You know, part of governing is making hard decisions, but before you make hard decisions, you have to bring the community along so they understand what is going on. So generally, no one wants to close schools. And then the last one is no.
Okay. All right, what are your policies to balance sustainable development and water shortages? And can you give examples?
Well, you're talking my language here. I actually have a water certificate from Metropolitan State, One World, One Water Center. When you're talking about reducing how much water is being consumed, it has multiple levels, right? It has to do with industrial use of water and what we can do to reduce that. It has to do with building codes and how we're gonna build new buildings so we're reducing how much water is being used. It also has to do with retrofitting, and it comes back to that conversation I was having with you, all of you earlier, about these unprecedented amount of resources that are coming down, and how do we ensure we do the literacy to homeowners and to renters so that their homeowners can actually install and reduce their rates. And then of course we have to be talking about how we're planting our gardens. I actually had a chance to work for the Colorado Native Plant Society. I'm all for pollinator beds. We need to be doing more of that in our parks and less of this grass that consumes so much water.
Yeah.
Anybody else want?
I'll go next.
I'll go.
Yeah, so I would like to bring it more into kind of micro system within households. I remember when we were under mandatory conservation, and we had to rotate when we could like water our grass. And that took an educational process about why we are all in this together. My mother is low income, and to have a expert come into her home and to say, here's where you're having leaks in your home, that could save you on your water bill, and also have assistance in repairing those leaks would be incredibly helpful. I believe that giving people incentives to change to behaviors that we can all feel good about is a very effective way to help reduce our water usage by educating people and providing the funding when they need to make those changes.
Yeah, I'd weigh in on that too. I mean, the water issue obviously is massive from a state standpoint, and it breaks, the factions are agricultural and then into the cities. So that's obviously very tough. The city needs to have leadership though in our usage down to individual spots. If you look at what we're doing at the city has to take leadership. At the stadiums, there, the urinals there are not the type that are the water efficient. The airport, the stadiums, all of those, the city should should enforce leadership there to show that this can be done. The other thing was about sustainable or affordable. There are constructs to keep property, we were just talking about development before, and the amount that, I think it's a 12% that needs to be, that developers need to either provide or put into a fund for affordable, that needs to be structured in a way that it's future-proofed and remains affordable.
Anyone else? Sure. I just want to go back a little, for what we have to do now, today, is we do have to conserve, and we have to look at ways that we have to conserve, save our water. I mean, it's a big problem, it's a big issue. And on the same token, we have to go back and figure out where the problem is. I don't know if many of you remember, but way back, years and years ago, they voted down Two Forks Reservoir, Two Forks Dam, if you remember that, in Deckers. Okay, which we wouldn't be in this situation that we are now had that dam been built, but it wasn't. We couldn't see far enough ahead to realize that we were going to be in a water pinch, and now we're in a water pinch. So we have to go back to saving the water so that we don't have to go through these extremes. But for today, we do have to conserve and do what we have to do, but we have to go back and find a solution to where we have the water storage and water available to us.
I am Owen Perkins, and as one of the 71% of Denverites who voted for the Fair Elections Act, I want to thank you for leading the way, all of you, and being among the 85% of candidates who are opting in for fair elections. I would like to ask all of you, if you'll answer, how the Fair Elections Act has impacted campaigns, and your campaign specific this time around, and if there are things you think need to be the next steps for making sure that our elections are played on an even level playing field that's accessible to everybody, equally accessible regardless of background or access to wealth. Thank you.
Sure, I'll start. I think that's the Fair Acts is excellent, and that's one of the sole reasons I decided to run for mayor, is because it does level the playing field. For years and years past, it's always been candidates that buy the election, simply because their funds, their war chests are so huge that someone that's running that has good intentions, good ideas, they can't afford to compete. So yes, thank you. That solved a lot of problems, and I think it opened the door for fair and even candidates to run a campaign, and for people to understand who we are and what we want to do in the city. And I think it was a very good deal that you've done.
Sure. It was a game changer. I probably know better than anyone else up here, having run before, how disparate it was to run on $140,000 versus millions. And I did it anyway. And we knew we had to run on people power. But that fund was also a huge factor of why I decided to run, because it was supposed to help grassroots candidates like me and all of us up here. It's a bit disappointing in some ways to see some folks who voted against it on city council now reaping most of the benefits, or a lot of the benefits. That is problematic, because city council wasn't taking the lead on that. The people did, and you did, and I want to thank you for doing that. So if you want to see some more in depth about that, Rebecca Henderson did a film called Running with My Girls that I'm in, along with other women who ran, and that was part of it, is talking about how disproportionate funding was for grassroots candidates. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a terrific program. Kind of the devil's going to be in the detail for sure. I think what you're seeing from the first reporting of who met the threshold, I think it kind of shows some credibility as to who's actually going to go the full cycle and actually be on the ballot. I'm a little worried that you get more of the same with career politicians who have that network of donors. I think if you just saw the third quarter analytics. Lisa Harad, who I'm not sure why she's not here, Leslie will probably surpass the front runner, which we all know is Kelly, and that's just because she has a stronger base from her existing office. So I think you'll continue to see additional state senators jump into the race.
Well, I'm glad that you're filming this. We did it, Owen. It was such a big deal for us to do, and you've taken it on to places that are just not in Denver. I was telling you, I was in the TV commercial for it. What was the commercial? We wrote what we wanted on dominoes, and when we change the way financing is done, all the dominoes fall. I believe in that analogy. A couple of the things, it's built to help you gain momentum. And I think we're all starting to see the campaigns that are emerging to build momentum. I think that's great. I'm also coming to realize that independent expenditures are going to be the place that people are fair election are pouring their money. We need to be running independent expenditure reform at the same time, perhaps even during this election. And if not during this election, we all need you to be focusing on where the Stark Money dollars is going. And a funny story, the law says that if you raise $50 in cash or more, then you have to give the rest back to the city. On the day of filing, I had to write a check for a penny and bring it down to the city hall.
A quick question. How many of you are fair election candidates? Good.
I'd add one other thing is this field is going to turn into 4 dozen people, right? One thing that I think could add to credibility, and it isn't tied to economics, is getting the ballot out sooner, or being able to petition to get onto the ballot. The Department of Election holds that until the last 3 months now. So there could be, when I did this 3 terms ago of Michael, when there were, again, 40 people on the ballot, it wound up being 10 of us. And just to have shrunk that field and gotten real input from the people that were going to be on the ballot, I think is more meaningful and shows credibility.
I just want to add that I think there are a lot of us that would agree that the front runners are sitting here at the table because they're here with you at the very first meeting where people are actually coming together.
Good evening. I'm retired military. Been a citizen of the city since '82, owned home here since '82. I've heard a lot of comments about safety here in Denver, and I've thought about how can we improve it. And the thing that really stuck me or made me want to talk about this issue is George Floyd. I don't believe George Floyd would have happened if the police in that city knew George Floyd or knew the people around where George Floyd lived. Because if they lived in that community, no way would have jumped on George Floyd like that. I know his friends, I know his mother, his family. So, simple question here. What are your thoughts on the requirement of Denver police officers residing in the city and county that they live in?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yes or no?
That's a yes.
Oh, yes. Or we're supposed to expand upon it. Yes, absolutely. I think it matters if you are living in your neighborhood. It has to do with whether you're at the grocery store and your mom sees the police officer in your neighborhood and has something to say about it when they mistreated you. What I can tell you is I grew up in West Denver in the 90s where we saw a massive amount of police violence against our community. I've witnessed it in my own family. I've had police officers point guns at me when I was 14 years old, misidentifying me as an adult. I can tell you the system is so broken that I was jailed for singing at the Capitol just 2 years ago. I can tell you when we went to, during the pandemic, they passed a sit-be lie ordinance at RTD, and I led a sit-in where I was surrounded by officers. We know officers pushed Tay Direct Anderson to the ground. We saw them intimidate Candy Citabacca and Lisa Calderon. If they lived in our neighborhood, it would be different.
Yep.
I think it's even more pronounced than you're saying. If you looked at, I've seen some analysis of where Denver police reside, And that is far from what we would, I agree with what you're saying of residency for sure, but also distribution within the city. And whether we have to create economic incentives within that to make that happen, but to the extent that they're, live within all of these different disparate communities would be the exact outcome. I agree.
So I, again, remember a time when we did have a residency requirement for police officers. And I think inherently it's around knowing the community. We also need to have an affordable Denver for people to reside here. We need to have incentives so that we have, whether it's police officers or social workers or teachers, be able to afford to reside here. I agree that our neighborhoods are stronger when we have people who understand our neighborhoods, who understand the dynamics of our neighborhoods. And something that you reminded me of, because I used to run Denver's reentry program and I worked in Denver's jails for 8 years, I've had Black officers tell me that if they had been on shift when Marvin Booker was booked in and murdered in the downtown jail, that would not have happened because they knew him and they knew how to talk to him and they knew how to de-escalate him and they knew his family. So your point is well taken that we need law enforcement officers fundamentally to understand our communities.
Okay, I agree as well, but I also agree that we can't set boundaries with our police. I think that they're training and they need to go out to different parts of the city and interact with the community and get to know the community. We can't set boundaries with the police, so if we ever have where other police officers have to come into a certain district or within boundaries, they don't know anyone. So then we have a problem. So we have to go back and better training and better community relationships between the entire police force.
I saw a question in the back.
Hi, how you guys doing? My question is, it's for you, Lisa. It's for everyone, though. I wanted to hear from you first. What are you guys willing to do for the police brutality that's going on in on blacks, though? Black people at that,
I wish we had more than a minute. Because my adult activism from a neighborhood standpoint started when my son was assaulted by Denver police, walking home from school at 15 years old and taking the bus, the East High School, on the intersection of Bruce Randolph and York, and being thrown up against a garage, handcuffed and humiliated, to sit on a curb as officers mocked him. And that started my quest in politics from an angry mother standpoint, because I could not get anybody to listen to me. I couldn't get our politicians to listen to me. I couldn't get our then council members who were Black to listen to me. And so we organized in our community and we started Black and brown coalitions and we polled our neighbors about what community safety meant to them. So would it be front and center in my administration? Absolutely.
I'll tell you, it's a big problem. And any type of police brutality is not good and it shouldn't be good. And I think we have to hold the police that do this accountable. Right now, they can do what they want to do and they can show the power that they have, knowing that they're not going to be reprimanded or held on charge. We have to hold them accountable when something like this happens and not shy away from doing this.
I am so sad to hear that my story about abuse in my family is mirrored by Lisa's family. It's happening to far too many people. It's also costing us lives of our community. It's also costing our city because we're paying out millions of dollars. That's the difference between housing, a playground, or any other public good that we need. I would point to the reimagining police recommendations, of which there's more than 120, but a robust accountability and independent monitor is so critically important to this role. I also want to take a moment to talk about merchant guards. These are the people who say that they're cops, but they're not deputized cops. They walk around wielding weapons and wielding force against our communities, and we have to do a lot more to regulate them too.
Met the new chief a few times, and he seems like he's willing to accept accountability. The only way I think you can enforce that, one of the things he said that we're paying for lawsuits, that doesn't come out of the police budget. That comes out of the city budget. So, you know, if you get a lot of things done, it's usually through the pocketbook. To the extent that there's a deterrent in that regard, that's where you get their attention.
So you're paying them for no reason, correct? So you're paying them for the community to still go through what they're doing in the community, the police?
No, I'm saying when they run afoul, when we have a bad apple that costs the city X amount of dollars,
So you still
it
have to
costs
pay
that.
the police. You still have to pay them for them doing whatever they want to do. You still have to pay them money, or, you know?
I'm pretty sure they're not gonna show up for work if they're not getting paid. But what I'm saying is if the bad apple does something that costs a judgment against the city, that comes out of the city budget, so collectively it impacts the income to every single officer.
I'm hearing a lot of people complain about the cost of living and the cost of rent or home ownership. And they're trying to dissuade development. But in my eyes, more development, it's just a supply and demand issue. If you increase the supply of housing, the price will go down. So less development actually causes more of a problem. I guess my question is, how much of this problem is simply a supply and demand issue, where people want to come to Colorado, people want to come to Denver, and so there's just not enough housing in this big population boom? And how much of it is something that we can actually do? Like, what's a policy? I think it's a big supply and demand issue, and it's really, there's not much that we can do other than, people will be forced out, not because of some bad policies, but just because it's a supply and demand issue. And quite frankly, as a homeowner, I'm very happy because the price has gone way up and it's very, very good for me. And the city's very happy because there's lots of extra, property taxes coming in. There's lots of positives about high value, but we never talk about that. We only talk about affordability. I'm worried that bad policies will actually, decrease my home value because we're pushing affordability issues. So how much is the supply and demand issue? Does that make sense? And what are the real policies that we can help people without hurting our actual homeowners? Does that make sense?
I can start with that simply because that's a big issue with me. And people always look at me and they say, hey, well, you're anti-development. I'm not. I agree with you 100%. Supply and demand, you have to meet that. My quarrel is with the city giving extra incentives for PUD changes that infringe on homeowners like you and me, where it's going to be a detriment to the neighborhood. There's plenty of room in this city to develop and meet that demand for housing. All we have to do is make sure it gets placed in the proper place. And I think we can do that. Well, I know we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a law. The intersection of supply and demand is the price for sure. So the existing statute, I think, is at a certain level of density, which we need as a city for obviously client environmental issue, transit issues, everything else. It requires a 12 or 12.5% affordability stipend. And then we have to just make sure that that is used properly and put into properties that remain inside of a land trust so that they continue to be affordable while allowing equity to be built up by the people that are within that.
So I think that's a very loaded statement. And I'm glad you raised it, because I think we need to have that conversation. I reject that premise, that it's a supply and demand. Supply for who and demand for who? It sounds a lot like trickle-down economics during the Reagan years. That didn't work for the poorest folks and the folks who are most vulnerable. The premise that we need to build more luxury housing so that the rich people will buy there as opposed to buying up our properties isn't feasible. As someone who lives in the Cole neighborhood and seeing my property values go up and nearly hitting $1 million for my house, I thought it was obscene. Because what that means is my neighbors can't afford to live there. It's not just about me. When we live in a community, we need to make it affordable for everybody. And so if we make it affordable for the ones who can least be there, then that opens the doors for everybody else. I don't want a top-down solution. I want a bottom-up from the roots for the people.
I haven't had a chance to answer yet, Mom. Yeah, I would like to answer it. I agree that simply build and everything will be affordable is reductionist. I grew up in Denver. They built, and it's still not affordable for so many people in my community. However, what I can say is living in Cole, where we've gotten so many choices. My friends own businesses. I remember when they opened the first gelato place, and I was like, wow, this is so fancy. They even had grapes in the pasta salad. My mom and I loved it. My friends own businesses. What hasn't grown with it is housing choice. I think that's what Lisa's getting at. When I've lived in a duplex in the middle of a block, I've lived in a split Victorian house. I live in a townhouse now and a high rise, and my mom owns a Victorian, just a straight up Victorian, just all these kinds of housing. What's missing is choices in housing. And again, I think what Lisa's saying and what I was telling you about the work I did with NOLA is that we have more to do around the stratification, because most of our programmatic work so far has been about 80% AMI or higher.
So we got time for 2 more questions. I know Roger's one. We got someone in the back? Okay.
Is this working?
So you, Roger, and that's it. Okay.
Hello. My name is Jessica Calderon. I am a West Denver resident. My question for each of you is, so first I want to talk about people who have been historically marginalized. People who have been historically marginalized were already faring worse than ever prior to the pandemic. Post-pandemic, we know that homelessness and all of these other social issues have increased exponentially. So my question for each of you is, if you are elected, what does equity mean to you? And how will you implement trauma-informed, targeted solutions to help the people who need it the most?
Well,
Okay, I'll try to answer that in 1 minute. I mean, it's gonna be very difficult because it's a big problem. And I think what we have to do, like I said before, the city is broken, and this is part of the problem, and it's broken. You get into the affordable housing, that creates a problem. And the system, the way they work, with the numbers that they work, where you have to make so much, $60,000, $70,000 to qualify for affordable housing, is absurd. You're not helping the people that you're supposed to help, especially when you're giving developers incentives where they have to have a percentage of their development dedicated to the lower income housing. That's number one. The second part of the problem that you're asking is, even if you get someone to squeak by and make that number to qualify for the affordable housing, now they're gonna have a problem with getting a loan, okay? You get that debt to ratio, you're not gonna get a loan because we all know how difficult it is to get a loan. So what we have to do to talk about solutions, I'm all about solutions. And I guess you don't hear it.
it is, Jessica, thank you for the question. As a service provider for over 20 years, I have applied gender responsive, trauma informed approaches, because I've been working with the most vulnerable populations, whether it's been domestic violence victims who lose their housing, or reentering persons coming out of jail who also have no housing. And that means also our unhoused folks. And wading into that, the fact that we hold on to so tightly the urban camping ban, something that has not worked in a decade, that is not evidence-based. What I would replace that with, it's up to city council to repeal that ordinance, but what I would propose instead and replace it with is care workers, C-A-R-E, and standing for crisis, assistance, response experts. So these are people who are going out there with evidence-based, trauma-informed, gender-informed ways of working with folks, and a lot of them being formerly homeless themselves.
You want to go? Okay. I really appreciate this idea that we have to look at individuals and look at them holistically as a person. Before I was in politics, and for 10 years I was a teacher and an educator. In order to make sure that these students each got an opportunity to grow, thrive, and learn, we had to individually understand and work with them for both their strengths and supporting them through their weaknesses. I think it's incredibly important when we discuss about equity of including people with lived experience or those that are closest to the problem because they're so often closest to the solution. I have just finished serving as the co-chair of the state's Environmental Justice Action Task Force, where we're reforming 12 agencies in the state level. And for the first time, we are going to have cumulative equity analysis applied to permitting, planning, spending, and so much more. So I have a proven track record of working both with individuals and also reforming a system to work with individuals.
I think I've stated my side just on the shelter first and leave it at that.
Can I use his time?
Yeah, I'm the last question here. Thank you all for being here. As a native of Denver, and those of you that are from Denver, as you grew up here and all the wonderful things you had to do and the beautiful neighborhoods you had. And one thing that I haven't heard tonight is any plan in terms of our youth. We have a high murder rate in Mount Bella, services, programs. What does that look like?
Well, what I can tell you is, being a youth that grew up here in Denver in the 90s and what they called the Summer of Violence, which was BS in the first place, what I can tell you is it was youth programmatic work. I had worked at the Museum of Nature and Science as my very first job, actually funded by Mayor Webb, and I had a chance to get a working license at 14. I went to the rec center where I learned to ride a horse for the first time, learned how to ski, where I learned how to make clay pots. You're right. I think the solution, and again, as an educator, and I didn't talk about how I'm also a trained therapist, this is very important that we work with these individuals to find what they're excited about, to give them the opportunity to grow and thrive, whether that's a small business, teaching other little kids, being a coach, having a job. There's so many things. It's about finding that bright spark inside of the youth and making them believe, and it starts with opportunity.
To answer your question, I touched on that in my introduction about the youth, and I talked to some folks out there in the hallway. We have to go back to providing something for our youth. Growing up, we go to our community centers, our swimming pools, Curtis Park, and there's always teams that would be competitive. You had basketball, you had the football, you had everything that a youth can do. Now, you look at the recreation centers, most of them are closed before you even get home from work. So we have to go back, we have to step back and provide that service to the youth. We have to cater to the youth in that way so that they have something to do instead of just staying out on the street and doing nothing. It has to be done.
Yeah, my experience with that, I was board chair for Impact 360, where we get youth involved in basically pathways to into a sport. And I don't care if it's cup stacking, as long as we get the outcome, which is a pathway to college. And it's really just to engage in that time after school where there's that open space. But there's so many nonprofits trying to do that around the city, and the assets that the city has that aren't being utilized for rec centers, for libraries, for other uses programmatically for these kids is something that needs to be done.
What do you think a living wage is?
Hey, wait a minute.
Sorry.
I need to answer, thanks. So I'm Generation X, and we were the first generation in seeing gang violence in Denver of shooting. And when I was in college with Professor Richard Jackson as our mentor, we lost one of our students, Cameron Smith, when he was shot and killed in Park Hill over wearing a red hat. That killed our innocence at that point, and it activated us to get involved and volunteer, like in Red Shield Community Center. And so that trajectory has continued with me, especially raising a Black boy. I want us to also expand our definition of youth. 18 to 24 years old is actually older adolescents. And they are often the hardest group to work with because our programming tends to go either toward adults or younger children. And so that's a gap age that we need to get better at serving.
Okay, thank you. So, one quick minute.
Come on, would you say it in the mic so we can?
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to wrap this meeting up. One quick statement as to why you want to be mayor. This is directed to all of you. 1 minute. Okay.
So I'm running for mayor because I want to have hope again in this city. We've had 12 years being under a cloud, of being told no, of having neighbors pitted against neighbors, affordable housing advocates versus open space, bicyclists versus cars, housed people versus unhoused people. We need to stop buying into the false choices that we don't have enough for everybody to thrive here. So I'm running to give everyday people in their communities a voice in this city that we've been deprived of. I'm running because we have amazing possibilities to create our futures in a way that we haven't. That's why I'm running under the slogan of Reimagine Denver. And I would love for you all to join me. So if you go to lisafordenver.com and donate or sign up to be a volunteer, we'd love to have you join our movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
The answer to that question is very simple. I'm running for mayor, came out of retirement to run for mayor, and the sole reason is to fix a broken city. The city's been broken for a long time, and not only on one issue, all across the board. It's broken, Roger. Talk just a little bit, I'm gonna mention to you about the youth that you're talking about. People that know me know that I boxed for 10 years of my life, and I trained, and I still train boxers now, world champions. And them teenagers to young adults in their 20s and 30s are not troubled people anymore. People think that boxing is a violent sport, but you should see the wonders it does for the youth. We need to take care of our youth. We need to fix this city. Vote for me and we're gonna fix it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ian, right for you.
Thank you. What you heard tonight are some of our leaders who have come forward to bring our best ideas. What I hope is that we elect a leader in the end who's willing to listen to others and their good ideas and bring them forward so that we come together, we rise to the occasion of climate crisis, to our housing crisis, and so much more. We have a unique opportunity in this exact moment to solve our problems intersectionally, working to reduce our water waste, improving our energy use, lowering our bills for our community, and ensuring water access to those that are most marginalized in our community. I've been a member of Denver and our Neighborhood Cooperation, as I said, for many years. Our slogan, neighborhoods work better when neighbors work together. I will approach all of my issues through regional cooperation because I believe at the center of it, we need, again, to have our 50 local governments working together to solve so many of these problems. I have worked for 3 branches of local government. I'm a teacher. I've been on 36 community boards and task force, and every time we got better outcomes when we worked together. Join us in our campaign. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm drawn to the office to make a difference. So what you're hearing tonight are a whole bunch of different ideas, and I'm a competitor, so I want to compete and find out what are those best ideas and how to institute those. There's this cliche in business where you talk about scrappy little department that punches above its weight and does well. And I think Denver has always kind of punched below its weight. I think Denver is a world-class city that has just never quite gotten there. And I think it has all the pretext to get there, but we have this big issue to solve, and it's going to take people from new approaches to do that. And if we succeed, we can elevate this town, sky's the limit. Limitless possibilities for Denver with good leadership.
Thank you very much. Okay, so in closing, I want to recognize the volunteers for Mobilize Denver. If you're still in the room, please stand up. Okay, so we're gonna end the meeting now. We want to have an opportunity for you to meet with the candidates in the room in the back. And there's refreshments in the front, and thank you for coming.
Lamont, I'd just like to say to Norm Harris III and to Chris Harris, thank you for helping us to put this event together. It would not have happened without their support.
Yes.
And I want that to be known. And this facility is open to the community.
I'm going to take a picture of you four together. Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks for joining us tonight for this Denver Mayoral. I know nobody ever sat there.
Said someone was coming.
I know, but I don't even know who these belong to. But anyway, thank you for coming and joining us on this Denver Mayoral Forum. More to come. Thank you. See you soon.